same thing. So that's ripple trim previous edit to playhead. And what you're doing is you're trimming it to where the playhead is. So that's why you play it to where you want.
Sure. Yeah, no worries.
You hit stop and then hit Q. So this works perfectly with one track. If you have more than one track, all of the tracks will move. If you want that to happen, great. If you don't, you have to lock them, and I'll show you that in a little bit. So this is where he starts talking, the first question.
I fell in love with travel, I think, right from the get-go, from the trip to Canada back in the day. The whole airplane concept was great. I didn't really travel much out.
So now I'm waiting for him to finish answering and pause for the next one. There's two things I can do. First of all, editors should listen to every single thing they've been handed. So you watch everything. And this can take a lot of time, but it's the only way you know the content that's in there. I happen to have listened to this already, and to make this faster, there are three keys, J, K, L, and they're right beside each other on a North American keyboard. So if you hit the L key, it plays. If you hit it again, it plays faster. So I can speed up my listening.
Outside of Canada until I was about 17, and I went to Europe, and I think I was bitten there. And I
hit it one more time.
Country after country, we got 107 countries, and turn my phone off, okay? Sorry.
So here he's found that his phone is on, so that whole thing we're not even going to use. So I'll play a little bit forward.
I've had it. There we go. Now we're into it.
So now he's taking that whole question. So I don't need the first stuff again. So Q, bye-bye. I just ripple trimmed that whole piece off. Now I don't care about that. I'm going to hit play from this point.
I have always loved traveling. Ever since that first airplane ride from Europe to Canada when I was young, I really got in my blood. I enjoyed nature programs, I got into photography at a very early age and realized that the world's quite a place to explore. So I now understand
KL.
So it's always been in my blood, I think.
So I hit K to stop and L to continue playing. And the reason why these are set up this way is because the keys are right beside each other. So it's like, it's as if you had a hardware shuttle and you're shuttling back and forth. So I'm going to get a little, I'm leaving a little space there. Okay, so now I have the first clip. This is where I want to cut it. So I'll hold Control Shift or Command Shift K, and that cuts everything. It's like going in to get the razor blade and cutting, but it's incredibly accurate because it's exactly where the playhead is. So this is my first clip. Now I'll show you up here. If we were doing this with subclips, it would be very much the same way. Again, we can zoom in or hit the plus and minus keys.
Sure. Yeah, no worries. I fell in love with travel.
Okay, so, and I think that was it, right?
I have always loved travel.
No, that's where he starts right there. So I've identified where I want that to start here. There's no ripple trimming in here because rippling is about more than one clip, and the source monitor only shows you one clip at a time. So I'm going to set an in point, and I hit the I key, or you can hit this button here to set an in point. So that's where he starts talking.
I have always loved traveling.
The same
since
keys.
That first airplane ride from Europe to Canada when I was, I really got in my blood. I enjoyed nature programs, I got into photography at a very early age and realized that the world's quite a place to explore. So I now understand Europe. So it's always been in my blood.
Okay, so he's finished right there. Now I'll either click on this or hit the O key for an out. So now we have an in and out. So if we zoom on here and look, that in and out is the same as this in and out. They're not connected. They're separate. This is a different in and out point. I'm doing this two different ways. You would only do it one way. So if you wanted to make a subclip from this, you could go to the clip and make a subclip. You can see it's a keyboard shortcut there, Command U or Control U. Hit that keyboard command, or you can right click, and there it is. And you have an option to restrict the trims to the clip boundaries. Restricting the trim means you can't go past that. You've cut the clip, and it's almost like that's the clip and you don't have more. In this example, it doesn't matter, but sometimes you want that. You can easily change this by editing the subclip, right-click, edit subclip, and turn that back on. So that's start travel. And maybe I could number it, and you can see it looks different than the master clip. That's a subclip. I've got a whole tutorial on working with subclips if you want to work with that. But basically, you'd do the same thing. You'd go through this and start chopping it up into pieces. I'm going to do that right now really quick and not use subclips.
My wife does it. Choosing a location is...
So watch this. I'm going to hit the Q key, and it moves back. It doesn't disturb this clip because it's just ripple trimming the previous clip. I can see about here is where he ends.
You know, it was on the list.
Command or Control Shift K to put a cut in there.
Well, traveling is something that's very, very dependent on the way you this back and forth.
Q.
Traveling is really book it. Book my airfare and away I go.
Command or Control Shift K. And again, I'm using the scroll wheel. Remember in the preferences I showed that the scroll wheel or the trackpad is horizontal zooming. That's the default. That allows me to stay zoomed in, but quickly move around. Boom, 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 boom. So I'm using one tool the whole time, the move tool, and using keyboard shortcuts to make it faster.
I have hundreds. Yeah. There are certain places which...
So right there, he pauses. Q. I'll go to the end.
talk about the experiences that I've had in certain countries.
Command or Control Shift K. And you notice I'm always giving myself a little breathing room at the end.
Okay.
Now I'm using the left and right arrow keys. When I want to get very accurate, the left and right arrow keys move one frame at a time. And I notice I want to find that spot where he has a good expression on his face. Q. Oh, and by the way, I should have mentioned this before, this is track targeting. The Q and the W key only work with whatever you have selected. So if I don't have that one selected on V1, then ripple trimming just won't work. We'll talk a little bit more about V1 and V2 in a second. So that's that's trimmed.
But still with the same mandates.
Command Shift K, scroll down, move to that beginning. Q, move to the end. Command Shift K. Q. Q. Now my first trim there, I could actually hear me saying something in the background, so I trimmed it again. Command Shift K or Control Shift K. Q.
To other people, as I'm sure you know by now.
Control Shift K. There's a lot of dead space there.
Well, thank you. I do appreciate that.
So I think it's about here.
Well, writing is something.
Again, I'm using the arrow keys, Q.
Really, really helped me when I do the writing for the show.
Space. Q.
Sure.
Arrow keys, Q. End of the end.
Going very, very well. Numbers are good.
Backspace. So there's all my clips, all my cuts. But now I've got my interview cuts. And typically, it's a good idea to call this selects. It's a very standard thing to do. These are all the selects, the selected clips that you're going to use, and you'll use them somewhere else. At this point, a lot of people will create a new blank timeline, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate this one, and I'll leave this one intact because it's just a clean reference point. It's so easy to create multiple timelines, multiple sequences. It's a great way to work. So Over here, I'll right click and choose duplicate. Select that and call this rough -01. So this is the first one. When I double click on it, it opens beside here. So just like these panels that were open, we have a timeline on panels here. So there's our rough one, there's selects, and I can close that off. So now I'm going to start fine-tuning this edit and adding some B-roll, adding some music and things of that sort. Oh yeah, and what I would have done a few times now, save. As soon as I finish cutting all those, save. Duplicate and open that up, save. Save, 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 save. You're not saving different versions. You're saving this same project, my show project. You're saving the same one. All right, so let's talk about adding clips to this. So let's go to my videos. This is the B-roll. I'll open that up. I'll make this a little smaller. So I've got B-rolls and I'm going to close places. I got music, B-roll, and I also want the images because I'm going to use that. Because he talks about plus, plus, plus. I'm going to zoom in. Now, when he's looking down, that's not a very good way to start, so I'll trim that. Just before he opens his mouth, cue.
I have always loved traveling.
And we're going to put a transition in here. I'll show you transitions more later, but I want this to start to up from black. So if you move the mouse to the edge, when you have the move tool, it's the trim tool. And if you click, you'll add a trim point. So this is just a regular trim point. And the keyboard shortcut for default transition, like I said, we'll look at transitions more detail in section. Control D on Windows, Command D on Mac is a cross dissolve. So now it dissolves.
I have always loved traveling. Ever since that first
And you know what I would do? Save. Okay.
airplane ride from Europe to Canada when I was young. I just really, it got into my blood. I enjoyed nature program. I enjoyed.
So we now have a problem. We've got this jump cut here. And that's not something you want. Jump cuts suck. And it drives me crazy to see folks on YouTube do that. I'm going to get on my soapbox for 2 seconds here. Jump cuts are not a style. People don't say, gee, I love jump cuts. When you watch a movie, if there are jump cuts, it's meant to indicate an expanse of time that's happening. If it's just a regular interview from this and you have a jump cut, it's considered wrong. It's an error. I don't care. Please don't comment that you think jump cuts are good. They're not. They just mean you're a lazy editor. Okay, I said it. All right, so how do we fix that? So we're going to fix that with some B-roll. And in this example, I've got a still image, and this is the Canadian coast. This is an image that Jonathan sent me. So I'm going to drag this over top of that edit. And when you drag that in, you see that it has a duration. And if I move my playhead over top, you'll see it. By default, still images have a duration of 5 seconds. You can change that bigger, smaller. We can make this a little bit bigger. I'm holding down Alt or Option on Mac and using my scroll wheel. Now, this kind of doesn't make sense because it chops.
It's always been in my blood, I think.
Chops the top of the.
Choosing a location is.
The lighthouse. So, we're going to get into effects a little bit later, but let's talk about changing the position of this frame, because photographs don't necessarily, well, they're not always 16 by 9. In fact, the default format for most cameras is 4 by 3s or almost square. To change that, you select the image or the clip and go to the effects controls. And this is probably twirled up for you. So twirl down motion. And you'll see position, scale, rotation. These are the default settings that every clip has. So if you want to change the position, if you click and drag over these numbers, this is the left to right movement, and this is the top to bottom. This is X, and this is Y. So if I can drag this up, now when it plays,
It's always been in my blood, I think.
but it's a little bit boring. It's just a static image. Instead, we want to give the impression that this is more of a motion. This is more like a video. It's a motion picture, so that if you do a fake scale, it gives you the impression that the camera is pushing in. So this area here and this duration here are tied together. So here's what I do. I don't go to the end of the clip, because even though I'm on the end of the clip, I don't see it anymore. So whenever I'm adding keyframes, I set my keyframe and then I move them. What the heck is a keyframe? A keyframe is a number. It's a scale number, like 100% scale or 50%, so it's half the size, or 200%, it's twice the size. Or it's a position of where something is. Every single object has a position and scale and opacity setting. So there are no keyframes here. And if I don't add a keyframe, then it won't change. Keyframes, animations happen when you have two keyframes. So we're going to set one scale property and then another scale property. The difference between the two is the animation. This makes so much sense when I just do it for you. So this is where I want the frame to finish. So I'll click on the stopwatch. You'll see it will turn blue and this little diamond shape will show up. So instead of moving this, I'll drag that to the end. So at the end of this clip, it will be whatever that is. There, 100%. And over here, let's actually zoom out. So I'll zoom in here first. That way you don't really see it. It's a little bit of a teaser. Did you catch what I did wrong? See, this is the kind of thing that I screwed up. Okay. I thought I was going to change position, but I'm actually changing scale. I didn't set a scale keyframe. This is just me being honest. I do this 25% of the time. Oops. So let me do it right. I'll just reset this back, add a scale, and drag that back over to there. And now I'll scale that in. So all I'm doing is I'm mousing over this, clicking and dragging. Or you could just type a number in. So let me scooch that up. And that's the kind of animation that we're going to have. I'll select these, drag them to the front. So there's two position keyframes and two scale keyframes. And this is what it looks like.
I think. Choosing a location is the interesting part of it.
So now we don't have a jump cut, we have B-roll. Let's play this back.
So it's always been in my blood, I think. Choosing a location is the interesting part.
That looks okay. I mean, I could tweak that all I want, but that basic idea of jumping to something else, having it move, and remember, we can have some nice music in there so that it's not just he stops talking and then there's an image. It's going to make sense in a little bit. And then we can keep doing that.
On the list.
So let's put in some video. Now this gets a little bit trickier because we've got an audio track to bring in and a video track. And that's where track targeting and source patching start working. Now the number one area that people get screwed up in Premiere Pro is source patching. If I click on a clip, and I'm going to use this clip here, you'll notice, I'm going to make my tracks a bit smaller. You'll notice V1 and A1 show up. If I go to the images, you'll see A1 disappears. There's no audio in an image, so A1 just disappears. there's audio in this clip and video in this clip. But if I accidentally turn off V1, I cannot bring in video. Premiere Pro expects you to know that. And quite frankly, this is what I found, is that for whatever reason, sometimes you didn't even touch it. V1 just goes woohoo and it shuts itself off. No problem. Just make sure V1 is turned on again and then you're dragging it in. Some people call this importing. This isn't. This is just editing. So if you don't have these in the right spot, so if you have them both A1 and V1 and you try to drag this in on another track, it's going to overwrite that track. So we've just deleted what was there. It's gone. We don't want to do that. You could protect this by clicking on those locks and now it's protected. But then the next time you want to chop this and edit it and move it, you have to unprotect it. So that's not a good workflow. It's better to actually track target, source patch, and track target. And for track targeting, if you right click in here and choose targets, follow inserts, and overwrites, then you don't have to move that too, because typically you would turn these off and turn that on. But when you have this set up correctly, when you drag it in and make sure your mouse is up to V2 and A2, now we've just dragged in a separate clip. And I'll hit play on this one.
And how it has more elephants than I've ever seen anywhere, including Africa and so forth. So I started exploring it. And
oh yeah, I forgot. He's talking about elephants here, and I'll show you in another cut in a second that I actually dropped in 2 elephant clips in there. But again, I'm hiding that jump cut.
traveling is, the way you travel is really...
Now that clip that I just brought in is too loud. We'll cover audio a little bit later. But basically you keep doing those same things. You're adding parts in, you're dragging in more clips.
And then basically we book it. Book my airfare and away I go.
I got some more camels here.
There are certain places which stand out primarily because of...
Now, this is all using the mouse, but you can be more precise if you use the source monitor. Let's show you that. Let's put this clip right here in this B-roll. I'll double click on it and load it in the source monitor. I'm not going to set any in and out points. I want this whole clip. And I want it to start about there. So because I've already got my track targeting, source patching is set up for V2 and A2, and I have this clip loaded in here, you've got these two buttons in here, insert and overwrite. And if you zoom all the way in and look at this, the difference between the two is insert moves everything down. So it inserts it, and it's like a ripple edit. Everything will move down. For a B-roll, we don't want that. We want the B-roll not to disturb the interview. So that's what this button is right here. And you can see they're both, the keyboard shortcuts they're beside each other on the keys. There's a comma key and the period key. So I'll click on this one, the period key. And you can see it showed up right in the right spot.
And I talk about the experiences that I've had in certain countries. I find when you're traveling, you experience...
Okay, so you just keep doing this and doing this and doing this until you end up with, let me open up my previous edit. Okay, so...
Never look back. I have always loved traveling, ever since that first...
I'll just show you each one of these little B-rolls.
So it's always been in my blood, I think. Choosing a location is the interesting part of it. There's no...
And I'm just going to go to my window menu, go to the audio track mixer, and I'm just going to turn
rhyme or reason as to what location I would choose. It just, you hear about some place,
Let's look at this
It
one.
has more elephants than I've ever seen anywhere, including Africa and so forth. So I started exploring it, and next thing you know, it was on the list. Travel.
So let me show you what I did right there with the elephants. So I've got two images, that image, that image. And remember, if we go to the effects controls, you can see there's the motion that we had. Same thing here. And I've got a cross dissolve in the middle. Remember, I added that fade up from black. When you add a cross dissolve to the lowest track, it's like fading up from black. In this example, the cross dissolve are between two of these clips.
And so forth. So I started exploring it, and next.
And to do that, I'll delete that. All I'm doing is selecting the edit point, just like I did before, Command D on the Mac, Control D on Windows.
So forth. So I started exploring it, and next thing you know, it was on the list. Traveling.
And you see the end of this clip is at the beginning of this. So the edit is really hidden in here. And if I want to turn any track off, you turn off the eyeball, and that track is now hidden. So this is the jump cut.
It was on the list. Traveling.
So that jump cut is hidden, not by this covering it, but the elephant ends at that point.
It was on the list. Traveling.
So your B-roll jump cuts don't necessarily have to be over top of an edit. They just have to seem natural, that the B-roll ends when the next cut starts. So let's look at a few others in here. Now this one, I've got several images, and they're all doing the same kind of thing.
Basically, we book my airfare, and away I go. There are certain places which stand out primarily because of experiences that I've had. For example, I was in the Valley of the Kings, and I was taking photos illegally, which I didn't realize at the time, and I was being chased by guides guides from the site up into the mountains, and I ended up crawling into an abandoned cave, or I guess it was an old tomb, and suddenly there were noises behind me, and I realized that there was either a bear living in a cave in Egypt, or it was a people, and sure enough, it was a family living there, and they were very hospitable, gave me something to drink which resembled poi, if you've ever been to Hawaii. It was just an awful thing.
So a couple of things are happening there. We've got these images, and I picked them because they help reinforce his story about the Valley of Kings. So this is a bunch of images he sent me from there. And